This lesson is about simple diffusion. So what is simple diffusion? To imagine simple diffusion, we must imagine a cup of water. Now, what happens if we add some red dye to this water? Well, we wouldn't expect the red dye to just accumulate at the top right. If you remember when you add orange juice or dye or any coloured liquid to water, it disperses quite evenly and equally. Let's imagine each one of these red dots is a red dye molecule and signifies the red colour it produces. Now, this isn't quite right. Why is it all clumped into a bit? How does this become dispersed? How do these red molecules become dispersed? Well, let's look on the right cup at what it should look like after a little bit of time, once the red dye has just gone through everything. Well, as you can see, it's quite even, very even. But how do molecules move in this way which make it so dispersed evenly? Well, molecules move, and so do atoms and ions, quite randomly. In fact, they move randomly. They will bump off the walls and they will bump off each other until they're so bumped off that they've reached equilibrium. Now, what is equilibrium? Equilibrium is the right side of the diagram. It's where it's so dispersed, so evenly, it's so equal, that if you were to divide it in half, the left and the right side would have approximately equal amount of molecules. As we can see in the right cup, there is a similar amount of molecules on the left side as the right side, divided by the green light. Now, this process happens, and from the left to the right cup, it's called diffusion. Now let's look at an example. This example is going to be a very chemistry sort of, biology sort of example. What we have here is a cell filled with little some mitochondria, I'm drawing right now, and a nucleus, of course. Outside the cell, we've littered with little glucose molecules. Each one of these orange dots signifies a glucose molecule. Glucose, of course, is a lot smaller than the dots I've drawn, and you'll learn about it a lot more, or you may already know a lot about it. Glucose is blood sugar, but every cell needs it to survive. It's processed by these little things, mitochondria, which I've drawn before. There's two of them. They break it down into energy. So the cell needs a constant stream of these glucose molecules. And how can it achieve this? Well, through simple diffusion. Now, inside the cell, we see a lot less molecules than outside the cell. So say there's low glucose there, or low concentration. Remembering that concentration means the amount of molecules per volume of liquid or space. Now, on the outside, we see a high concentration. So there's a lot more. Now, I'm not going to tell you right now that it moves from the high to the low. And I'm going to show you why. Let's remember what happened to the red dye. It moved quite so that it was so equal. They went from a so clumped up area to so equal. But how does this happen? Well, let's look at it. This little compartment I've drawn down there. The right side will signify the cell, while the left side is the outside of the cell. It's a more basic diagram. Now, on the left side we've littered it with little little orange dots, little glucose molecules. On the right side, we've littered it with only some orange dots, orange glucose molecules. Now, if you remember what happens afterwards, it's that they're both equal. Both sides are equal, just like in the red dye. What does this mean though? Well, this means that there's a constant stream of glucose from the high to the low until equilibrium is achieved, of course. Now, the outside of the cell is high, and the inside of the cell is low. and at the end it's equal on both sides. So that means that the high must be losing some molecules, but the low side must be gaining some molecules, which basically means that the molecules move from high concentration to a low concentration until they're both equal. But of course, they may not be equal. And this may result from... they may never become equal. And this may result because the mitochondria are eating the glucose, or using the glucose, better terminology, for energy. And it's because they're constantly using the glucose. Inside the cell is constantly a lower concentration outside the cell. So the glucose molecules will constantly move from the high concentration to the low concentration. Now, let's get a nice definition of what simple diffusion is. Simple diffusion is a passive process. Now, what does this mean? Well, a passive process means that it does not require energy. It happens without you putting a battery or any sort of input on energy. You put some red dye in water and it's going to flow straight throughout. You don't need to require energy. Now, this is probably a good term to put down if you're defining simple diffusion. It always is passive. No energy is required. Well, it also has not just molecules, but atoms or ions or other compounds. These can be sodium ions or chlorine ions, or just molecules like the red dye molecule or the glucose molecule. Now, they always move from a higher concentration to a lower concentration. This is until equilibrium is achieved. As remember from the cell, or even from the red dye cup, that it always moves from the area where there's lots of molecules, where there's low molecules, until there's an equal amount. This results in a net or overall amount of molecules moving from the higher to the lower. And as such, the area of high concentration loses molecules to the area of lower concentration until they're equal. However, they may not always become equal, and as such, equilibrium may not always be achieved. This is because maybe some of the molecules in the area of lower concentration or somewhere else are being constantly used, and as such, simple diffusion will not stop as equilibrium is not achieved. Thus, a constant flow of glucose into a cell, if the cell is using the glucose for energy, or other similar scenarios. Thank you. May more facilitate diffusion tomorrow or later.